Ladies and gentlemen, we've all heard stories that make the hair on our neck stand up, stories that warn us, scare us, and sometimes isolate us. And today, I want to share one of those stories. There was once a woman, they say, who was cursed. Every man who dared to love her, to stand by her side, met an untimely end. Over time, she became less of a person and more of a myth. A dark whisper passed from one fearful heart to another. Let me ask you this: what happens to a person who is reduced to a story, one soaked in fear and shame? Stories have power. They shape how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and how we understand each other. But the most powerful stories, the ones that stick with us, are the ones that come from a place of vulnerability. They're the ones that reach into the deepest parts of who we are and remind us that we're not alone. That's where I want to begin today, with a story that's both unsettling and deeply human. There was once a woman who lived with a curse. At least that's how the story goes. They said anyone who loved her, anyone who dared to marry her, would die. She became the subject of whispers, the cautionary tale told late at night to ward off the brave or foolish. Men avoided her not just out of fear for their lives, but because being near her was a threat to their reputation, their legacy, and their future. Her presence wasn't just unwelcome, it was dangerous. And for the woman, what did it mean to live under the weight of that story? Imagine being reduced to a shadow, a figure of superstition. Every glance from a passerby isn't one of curiosity or connection, but of judgment and fear. Every time her name is spoken, it comes with a warning, a sense of doom. How do you live in a world that doesn't see you, but only the curse it's decided you carry? The power of this story isn't just in its eerie premise. It's in the way it speaks to something universal. Because while most of us won't face accusations of carrying a curse, all of us know what it feels like to be defined by something we didn't choose. All of us have felt the sting of being misunderstood or labeled. Maybe it was a mistake we made that people wouldn't let us forget. Maybe it was something about us, our background, our family, our dreams that others couldn't accept. Maybe it was simply being different in a world that demands sameness. To live under the weight of a story you didn't write is a kind of curse, isn't it? The woman in this tale wasn't just battling isolation, she was battling shame. And shame is insidious. It doesn't shout its presence. It whispers, this is who you are unworthy, you don't belong. Shame is what turns a narrative into a prison. It's what keeps us silent when we need to speak and hidden, when we need to be seen. But here's the thing about stories: they're not static. They can be challenged, they can be rewritten, and sometimes they need to be embraced before they can be transformed. To embrace the story isn't to accept it as truth. It's to hold it up to the light, to examine its pieces, and to understand where it came from. Why was this woman labeled as cursed? Who decided her fate? And what does her story say about the fears and insecurities of the people around her? Because every story, even the cruel ones, tells us something about the world in which it was created. In this case, it tells us about fear of the unknown, fear of vulnerability, fear of loss. It's easier to blame someone for the pain in our lives than it is to sit with the discomfort of not knowing why bad things happen. The curse wasn't just a punishment for the woman, it was a way for others to explain the inexplicable. It was a shield against their own vulnerability, their own fears of fragility and mortality. But what happens when we stop using stories as shields? What happens when we look at them not as fixed truths, but as mirrors reflecting the world as it is, not as it has to be? The woman in this tale, like so many of us, didn't choose the story she was given. But she had a choice about how to live within it, and so do we. When we embrace our stories, the ones we've been told, the ones we've lived, we gain power over them. We begin to see the places where they've held us back and the places where they've made us stronger. Embracing the story means acknowledging the pain and the shame, yes, but it also means finding the courage to see beyond it. It's about saying, this is where I've been, but it's not where I'm staying. For the cursed woman, embracing her story might have looked like defiance, choosing to live in a world that had written her off. It might have looked like kindness, showing love and compassion, even when others refused to offer it to her. Or it might have looked like quiet resilience, finding a way to carry on in the face of rejection and fear. Whatever shape it took, it wasn't the story that defined her. It was the way she responded to it. There's something profoundly human about this, because while our circumstances might differ, all of us have stories that challenge us. All of us carry burdens that force us to ask, what now? The woman's story isn't just about a curse, it's about what it means to live under the weight of judgment, fear, and isolation, and what it takes to rise above it. So as we sit with this story, I want to invite us to think about the stories we carry. The ones we've been told about who we are, the ones we've internalized, and the ones we want to write for ourselves. Because when we embrace the story, not just the parts we like, but the parts that scare us, too, we take the first step toward changing it. Shame is one of the most universal emotions, yet it's also one of the most isolating. Unlike guilt, which focuses on something we've done, shame whispers to us that we are the problem, that there's something inherently wrong with who we are. And for the woman in this story, labeled as cursed, shame wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it was a constant companion. The narrative that surrounded her didn't leave room for her humanity. It reduced her to a cautionary tale, a symbol of danger and destruction. But here's the thing about shame: it thrives in silence. It grows in the dark corners where no one dares to shine a light. The story of this woman wasn't just a story, it was a verdict, a societal judgment that carried with it an unspoken agreement: don't question it, don't look deeper, and definitely don't challenge it. The shame wasn't hers alone, it was something imposed on her by those who were too afraid to face their own vulnerabilities. Let's think about why shame is so powerful. At its core, shame is about disconnection. It tells us that if people really knew us, if they saw the parts of ourselves we're most afraid to show, they wouldn't love us. They wouldn't accept us. And so we hide, we shrink, we play small. For the woman in this story, the shame of being labeled cursed wasn't just about fear for her own life. It was about the isolation that came with being seen as untouchable, unworthy, and dangerous. But why was she labeled in the first place? To challenge shame, we have to question the systems and beliefs that allow it to take root. In this case, the idea of a curse wasn't just about her, it was about the people around her trying to make sense of their own fears. When we face uncertainty, when things go wrong and we don't have a clear answer, our instinct is often to look for someone or something to blame. It's easier to create a scapegoat than it is to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. The woman became the scapegoat for the community's fears. Her story wasn't about her actions or choices, it was about their need to explain what they didn't understand. And when you think about it, isn't that what shame does to all of us? It takes our fears and insecurities and magnifies them until they feel insurmountable. It convinces us that we're alone in our struggles, even when those struggles are shared by so many others. Challenging shame means refusing to accept its silence. It means daring to ask questions that others are too afraid to ask. Why is it that we're so quick to label and judge? Why is it easier to isolate someone than to offer them understanding? For the woman in this story, the shame wasn't hers to carry. It belonged to the people who refused to see her for who she was, who chose to define her by a story instead of her humanity. And yet shame is sticky. Even when we know intellectually that it's not ours to carry, it can feel impossible to shake. That's because shame isn't just about what others think of us, it's about what we come to believe about ourselves. When you hear the same story repeated enough times, when the world tells you again and again that you're not enough, it starts to feel like the truth. The woman in this story wasn't cursed, but she was treated as though she was, and that treatment became its own kind of prison. How do we break free from that prison? First, we have to name the shame. We have to call it out for what it is: a lie. Shame thrives in secrecy, but when we speak it out loud, when we share our stories with people who can hold them with compassion, it begins to lose its power. For the woman, perhaps this looked like finding someone who was willing to listen, someone who could see beyond the label of cursed and recognize the person beneath it. Second, we have to challenge the systems that perpetuate shame. In this story, the curse wasn't just a belief, it was a way of maintaining control. It kept the community from questioning their own fears and assumptions. It allowed them to avoid the hard work of vulnerability. To challenge shame, we have to be willing to face our own discomfort. We have to ask ourselves why we're so quick to judge and so slow to offer empathy. Finally, we have to rewrite the story. Shame is powerful because it tells us a story about who we are, but that story isn't set in stone. The woman in this tale didn't have to accept the label of cursed, just as we don't have to accept the labels or judgments that others place on us. Rewriting the story doesn't mean erasing the pain or pretending it didn't happen. It means taking ownership of our narrative and deciding what we want it to say. When we challenge shame, we do more than just free ourselves. We create a ripple effect that touches everyone around us. Shame is contagious, but so is courage. When we dare to speak our truth, to challenge the labels and judgments that hold us back, we give others permission to do the same. What does it mean to be cursed? To most people, it means being marked by something dark and unavoidable, a fate you didn't choose but are forced to bear. It's a word that carries a sense of doom, something sinister and inescapable. In the story of the woman who was said to be cursed, this label became her identity. People saw her not as a person, but as a warning. But what happens when we look closer, when we step back from fear and examine the idea of a curse? It starts to reveal more about the people who created it than the person it was placed upon. The curse in this story wasn't a tangible thing. It wasn't written in the stars or handed down by some higher power. It was a human creation born out of fear, misunderstanding, and the need for control. When strange or tragic things happened, the easiest explanation was to blame the woman. She became the embodiment of their worst fears: fear of loss, fear of death, and fear of things they couldn't explain. Labeling her as cursed gave people a way to make sense of chaos. But let's pause for a moment. Why do we as humans have such a deep need to assign blame? When things go wrong, when life feels uncertain or unpredictable, it's uncomfortable to sit with that uncertainty. We crave answers, even if those answers are flawed or unfair. The idea of a curse provided the people in the women's community with a sense of order. It allowed them to believe that tragedy wasn't random, that it could be traced back to someone somewhere. And once they had their scapegoat, they could go on living without confronting the fragility of their own lives. Now, let's reframe the curse by asking a different set of questions. What if the curse wasn't about the woman at all? What if it was a reflection of the collective fear and fragility of the people around her? What if she wasn't cursed, but was instead burdened with the weight of everyone else's insecurities? The curse, then, wasn't hers to carry, it was theirs to confront. When we reframe the curse, we begin to see the woman not as a source of danger, but as a symbol of resilience. Imagine what it must have taken to live under that label, to be shunned, whispered about, and judged, yet still find a way to survive. The curse didn't destroy her, it revealed her strength. Every day that she chose to keep going, to keep existing in a world that had written her off, was an act of defiance. She became more than the curse, they just didn't have the courage to see it. This reframing doesn't just apply to her story, it applies to all of us. How often do we allow ourselves to be defined by the labels and judgments of others? How often do we carry burdens that aren't really ours to bear? The idea of a curse might feel distant or fantastical, but the experience of being misunderstood, blamed, or judged is all too real. And just like the woman in the story, we have the power to reframe those narratives. To reframe the curse is to shift the focus from fear to understanding. The people who labeled her as cursed were afraid of the unknown, afraid of tragedy, and afraid of vulnerability. But fear has a way of clouding our judgment. It narrows our vision until we can only see one version of reality, one explanation for the things that scare us. When we challenge that fear, when we ask, what else could this mean? We open the door to empathy and connection. Empathy is the antidote to fear. Imagine if someone in the woman's story had dared to look past the label of cursed and see her as a person. What might they have discovered? Perhaps she was kind, strong, or wise. Perhaps her experiences gave her a perspective that no one else had. When we reframe the curse, we stop seeing people as the sum of their worst moments or the worst stories told about them and start seeing their humanity. Reframing also invites us to take ownership of our narratives. The woman didn't choose to be labeled as cursed, just as we don't choose many of the labels or assumptions placed on us, but we do have a choice in how we respond. Do we accept the labels? Do we let them define us? Or do we push back, challenging the stories that don't align with who we truly are? Reframing the curse doesn't mean ignoring the pain or pretending the stigma wasn't real. It means acknowledging that pain while also recognizing the strength it took to endure it. The curse, when viewed through a different lens, isn't just a mark of tragedy, it's a testament to resilience. The woman's story wasn't about the people she lost, it was about the life she continued to live in spite of it all. When we shift our perspective, we begin to see the ways in which curses, whether literal or metaphorical, are often projections of our own fears and insecurities. They're not about the person being labeled, they're about the people doing the labeling. Reframing the curse is an act of courage. It's about saying, I won't be defined by your fear. I am more than the story you've written for me. And when we do that, when we take the labels and judgments we've been handed and transform them into something meaningful, we reclaim our power. We show the world that we are more than the myths, fears, or assumptions placed upon us. Resilience is a quiet, steady force. It doesn't shout or demand attention, but it's always there, working in the background of our lives, allowing us to rise again after every fall. When we think about the woman labeled as cursed, her story is not just one of survival, it's a story of resilience. It's about how she endured isolation, rejection, and fear and still found a way to exist in a world that sought to erase her. Resilience isn't just about enduring hardship, it's about the strength it takes to remain true to yourself in the face of it. To understand her resilience, we first have to understand what she was up against. Imagine living a life where the world has decided that you are a threat. Everywhere you go, you are met with suspicion and fear. People avoid you not because of who you are, but because of what they believe you represent. You're not a person to them, you're a cautionary tale, a symbol of something they don't want to confront. For the woman in this story, her so-called curse became her entire identity in the eyes of others. Yet she continued to live, to breathe, and to endure. That endurance is no small thing. It's easy to underestimate the strength it takes to wake up every day and face a world that has turned its back on you. Resilience isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet decision to keep going when everything around you feels unbearable. For the woman, resilience might have looked like small acts of defiance, walking through the market even though people avoided her, holding her head high even when she heard the whispers. These small acts add up. They become the foundation of a life lived on one's own terms, no matter how difficult the circumstances. Resilience is also about adaptation. It's not about pretending that pain doesn't exist or that challenges aren't real. It's about finding ways to move forward despite them. For the woman, this might have meant learning how to create her own sense of belonging when the world denied her one. Maybe she found solace in nature, in quiet moments away from the judgmental eyes of others. Maybe she discovered inner strength in the solitude forced upon her. Resilience is about taking the pieces of your life, no matter how broken they feel, and building something new. But resilience isn't just about individual strength, it's also about connection. Even in the most isolating circumstances, there's a part of us that craves understanding and belonging. For the woman, resilience might have meant seeking out the few people who were willing to look past the label of cursed and see her for who she truly was. It might have meant finding a way to connect with others, even if those connections were fleeting or unconventional. Resilience is about recognizing that we are not meant to navigate life's challenges alone, even when the world tells us otherwise. One of the most powerful aspects of resilience is its ability to transform pain into something meaningful. The woman in this story didn't choose to be labeled as cursed, but she had a choice in how she responded to that label. She could have let it consume her, define her, and dictate the course of her life. Instead, she chose to keep going. In doing so, she turned the narrative on its head. Her story wasn't just about the men who loved her and died, it was about the life she built in spite of the odds stacked against her. Celebrating resilience means acknowledging the courage it takes to live authentically in a world that often demands conformity. For the woman, her resilience might have looked like refusing to let the judgment of others dictate her self-worth. It might have looked like finding joy in unexpected places or holding on to hope even when it felt out of reach. Resilience isn't about being unbreakable, it's about being willing to rebuild yourself over and over again, no matter how many times life tries to tear you down. And let's not forget, resilience is not just about survival, it's about growth. The challenges the woman faced didn't just test her, they shaped her. They revealed her strength, her creativity, and her capacity for love and forgiveness. Resilience is what allows us to take the hardest parts of our lives and use them as fuel for transformation. It's what enables us to look back on our pain and see not just what we lost, but what we gained in the process. The woman's resilience also serves as a reminder that our worth is not determined by the opinions of others. The people who labeled her as cursed did so out of fear and misunderstanding, but those labels didn't define her. She defined herself through her actions, her choices, and her ability to endure. Resilience is about reclaiming our narratives, about saying, this is who I am, not who you say I am. Finally, celebrating resilience means recognizing that it's not a finite resource. It's something we cultivate and grow over time through every challenge we face. The woman in this story might not have seen herself as resilient. She might have simply been doing what she needed to do to survive. But that's the beauty of resilience. It often reveals itself in hindsight. It's in the moments when we look back and realize just how far we've come, just how much we've overcome. Resilience is a testament to the human spirit. It's the part of us that refuses to give up, no matter how difficult life becomes. It's the spark that keeps us moving forward, even when the path ahead is unclear. The woman in this story didn't just survive, she thrived in her own way, proving that resilience isn't about perfection or ease. It's about finding a way to rise, no matter how many times we're knocked down. Connection is one of the most fundamental needs of being human. It is as essential to our well-being as air and water, and yet it's often the first thing to erode when fear and judgment take hold. The story of the woman labeled as cursed reminds us of what happens when connection is severed, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Her isolation was not simply the result of fear, it was the loss of connection that transformed her life into a lonely existence. But just as connection can be broken, it can also be rebuilt, and that's where the true power of her story lies. Imagine what it must have felt like for her to be cast out of the web of connection. She didn't just lose relationships, she lost the sense of belonging that binds us to the world. Every look of suspicion, every step taken to avoid her, wasn't just a rejection of her presence, it was a rejection of her humanity. This lack of connection turned her into a symbol rather than a person, making it easier for the community to distance themselves emotionally. But in doing so, they didn't just hurt her, they hurt themselves. Connection, after all, is mutual. When we cut someone off, we also lose a part of ourselves. And yet the need for connection doesn't disappear. It remains quietly persistent, even in the loneliest of places. For the woman, that need might have shown up as a longing to be understood, to be seen for who she really was, rather than the label that had been thrust upon her. It might have been the hope, however faint, that someone would reach out, not with judgment, but with compassion. That hope is the thread of connection that can withstand even the harshest circumstances. It's what keeps us tied to the possibility of something better. To end with connection is to recognize that it's never too late to rebuild those ties. The woman's story isn't just a tragedy, it's a call to action. It asks us to consider how we might have played a role in isolating others intentionally or unintentionally, and how we might begin to mend those fractures. Connection isn't about grand gestures, it's about the small, everyday acts of reaching out, of choosing empathy over fear. In the woman's world, her so-called curse wasn't just about her, it was a reflection of the community's fears and insecurities. They labeled her to protect themselves, to avoid facing their own vulnerabilities. But in doing so, they denied themselves the richness of connection with someone who might have had much to offer. How often do we do the same? How often do we let fear, bias, or assumptions keep us from truly connecting with others? Connection requires courage. It asks us to step outside of our comfort zones and open ourselves up to the possibility of being hurt or misunderstood. But it's in that vulnerability that true connection is formed. For the woman, a single act of courage from someone in her community could have changed everything. It could have been as simple as a conversation, a willingness to listen, or a refusal to perpetuate the narrative that she was cursed. These small acts of connection might not seem significant in the moment, but they have the power to transform lives. Connection also requires curiosity. It's easy to make assumptions about people, to label them and move on without asking deeper questions. But when we approach others with curiosity, we create space for understanding. What if someone in the woman's life had been curious about her story, not the one imposed on her, but the one she carried within herself? What might they have learned about her dreams, her struggles, her humanity? Curiosity is the bridge between judgment and empathy, and it's one of the most powerful tools we have for building connection. At its heart, connection is about seeing and being seen. The woman in this story was never truly seen by those around her. They saw the label, the curse, but not the person. And isn't that what all of us want to be seen for who we truly are? Not just for the roles or labels others assign to us. To end with connection is to commit to seeing people, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. It's about looking past the surface and recognizing the shared humanity that binds us all. Connection is also a reminder that we are not meant to navigate life alone. Even in her isolation, the woman likely held on to the hope of connection because it is part of what makes us human. That hope might have been quiet, buried beneath layers of pain, but it was there. It's the same hope that exists in all of us, the longing to be understood, accepted, and loved. When we honor that hope in ourselves and others, we begin to heal the fractures that keep us apart. Ending with connection means recognizing that every story, no matter how painful, has the potential to bring us closer together. The woman's story might have started with judgment and fear, but it doesn't have to end there. It can end with a choice to reconnect, to rebuild, and to create a world where no one is defined by the worst things said about them. Connection is not just a gift we give to others, it's a gift we give to ourselves. When we reach out, when we choose to see and be seen, we create a ripple effect that touches everyone around us. We remind each other that we are not alone, that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of light. The story of the woman labeled as cursed isn't just a tale of pain and isolation, it's a mirror reflecting the fears, judgments, and choices we all make in the face of the unknown. It challenges us to question the narratives we accept, to confront the shame we carry or impose, and to recognize the resilience that exists in the quiet moments of endurance. Most importantly, it reminds us of the transformative power of connection, the courage it takes to reach across the divide, the empathy required to see someone for who they truly are, and the profound healing that comes when we rebuild the bridges we've burned. Her story calls us to action to break the silence around shame, to reframe the labels that limit others and ourselves, to celebrate the resilience that carries us through adversity, and to end with the connection that makes us human. Let it be a reminder that every story, no matter how dark, carries within it the seeds of hope, growth, and transformation. The question is whether we have the courage to nurture them. Thank you.